The morning mist rolled over Inverness like a heavy secret, softening the edges of the town. Lydia McAllister stood by the frosted window of her small cottage, watching the gray light crawl across the hills. 5 years had passed since her husband disappeared. 5 birthdays, 5 winters, and countless unanswered prayers. Yet every dawn, she still found herself looking toward the same road, as if he might walk back through the fog and say, "I was only lost." Her hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup, not from cold but from memory. Richard had promised he'd call the moment he landed in London for his business trip. But that call never came. The police searched, friends whispered theories, but Lydia just waited. Waiting became her second skin, the quiet torture that nobody saw. And as the kettle whistled, she whispered to herself, "Maybe today." Down the lane, Margaret Campbell's voice cut through the silence. "Lydia, you're wasting away in there," she barked from her garden gate, her Scottish accent sharp as ever. Lydia smiled faintly. Margaret's voice was her daily alarm, her reminder that life still had edges. Pulling her shawl tighter, she stepped outside into the crisp air. The town was waking up, fishermen, bakers, and gossipers all doing what they did best. But to Lydia, everything still smelled like yesterday. As Lydia walked toward the old bookstore where she now worked, her thoughts wandered. Once, she had been full of laughter, teaching poetry to wide-eyed students. Now, she only spoke to strangers who bought used books. She found comfort in their briefness. They entered her life and left, just like Richard. But she never expected that one of those strangers would soon rewrite her story. That afternoon, as the rain began to fall, the shop bell jingled. Lydia looked up, and there he was. A tall man, drenched, with a camera slung across his chest and eyes that carried both weariness and warmth. "Sorry," he said with a half-smile. "Is it all right if I wait out the rain?" Lydia nodded slowly. Something in his voice, his eyes, his presence, it stirred a feeling she hadn't known in years. She didn't realize it yet, but this stranger was about to fulfill a wish she hadn't even spoken aloud. The stranger's arrival isn't just a coincidence. It's the beginning of a destiny that Lydia never dared to imagine. The rain in Inverness was merciless that evening, a wild curtain of silver washing the streets clean. Lydia stood behind the counter of her quiet bookshop, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The stranger had taken a seat near the back, shaking water from his dark hair as he placed his camera carefully on the table. His presence was calm, yet unsettling, like a secret wrapped in human form. She couldn't help but glance at him every few seconds. The way he seemed lost, but not the kind of lost that needed directions. More like a man escaping something. "Would you like some tea?" Lydia asked, surprising herself with the offer. He looked up, smiled, a small, tired smile that softened his sharp features. "Only if it's strong." "I've been chasing storms since morning," he said with a laugh that carried a trace of pain. She poured 2 cups, her hand steady now, though her heart felt oddly unsettled. The rain hummed its steady rhythm against the glass as they sat across from each other, 2 strangers bound by silence, the kind that feels heavier than words. He introduced himself as Ethan Cole, a travel photographer from London. "Scotland has the kind of light that hides stories," he said, glancing toward the rain. Lydia smiled faintly. She liked that sentence. It sounded like something she would have told her students back when she still believed words could heal. "And what stories are you hiding from?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "The kind that don't have endings yet." His answer lingered in the air, both poetic and painful. Lydia didn't press further. She understood what it meant to live unfinished. The rain refused to stop. Hours passed, and the world outside turned from gray to silver to night. Lydia found herself laughing for the first time in months as Ethan told stories of his travels. The deserts of Morocco, the jungles of Malaysia, the icy cliffs of Iceland. His voice carried images that painted her small shop into a world far beyond Inverness. "You should see it," he said. "The way the sky bleeds into the water, it's like the world is confessing something." Lydia's eyes softened. "Maybe I'll see it one day," she whispered. Ethan smiled. Maybe you will. Neither of them realized how prophetic those words would become. When the rain finally eased, Ethan stood and reached for his jacket. "Thank you for the tea," he said, his voice quiet, almost reluctant to leave. Lydia nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Safe travels." He turned to go, but paused at the door. "You know," he said, "I've been photographing strangers for years, but I've never met one who felt familiar." And then he was gone, out into the misty streets of Inverness, leaving behind the echo of a sentence Lydia couldn't stop replaying in her head. That night, she lay awake, wondering why a stranger's words felt like the beginning of something fateful. The next morning, Ethan returns, not for tea, but for something Lydia never expected. When someone shows up twice in your life without reason, it's never an accident. It's a sign the universe wants to talk. The next morning, Lydia unlocked the door to her bookstore earlier than usual. The air outside was still heavy with fog, the kind that blurs edges and hides what's coming. She was arranging books on the counter when the bell above the door jingled. Her heart jumped. No one ever came this early. When she looked up, it was him. Ethan stood there again, camera hanging from his neck, a shy grin tugging at his lips. "You're open early," he said softly. Lydia tried to sound casual. "You're early, too." But something in her voice betrayed her surprise, maybe even relief. He carried 2 takeaway coffees, one already steaming through the lid. "For you," he said, placing it on the counter. "A peace offering, in case I talked too much yesterday." Lydia couldn't help but smile. The smell of roasted beans filled the room like comfort. "You didn't talk too much," she said. "You just made the rain sound less lonely." Ethan leaned on the counter, studying her face, as though he were trying to photograph her with his eyes. "I can't stand silence," he admitted. "It makes my thoughts too loud." Lydia nodded. She understood that all too well. They sat together in the corner of the shop, surrounded by books older than their parents. The conversation began with small things, travel, weather, favorite novels, but quickly slipped into deeper waters. Ethan spoke about his father's death and how photography became his way to capture what time always stole. Lydia, hesitant at first, spoke about Richard, the husband who'd vanished 5 years ago without a trace. "They said he might have drowned in the channel," she whispered. "But no one ever found him. Not even a suitcase." Ethan listened, no pity in his eyes, only understanding. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "people vanish before they're gone." A silence hung between them. Not awkward, but raw. Lydia ran her fingers over the spine of an old poetry book, whispering, "I used to believe love could survive anything." Ethan tilted his head. "And now?" She smiled sadly. "Now, I believe love survives by learning to live without." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, softly, he replied, "Or maybe it survives by finding you again, in a different form." The word struck her like a whisper from the past. She looked at him, and for a brief second, Richard's face flashed in her memory. But it wasn't him. It was Ethan, looking back with the same kind of sadness that comes from being broken the same way. The bell rang again as a gust of cold air rushed in. Margaret stood there, umbrella dripping, her sharp eyes taking in the scene like a hawk. "Oh, I see," she said with a sly grin. "The rain brings you customers, eh?" Lydia flushed. "Margaret, this is Ethan. The man who's been loitering round since last night." Margaret interrupted. Ethan chuckled. "Just a traveler, ma'am." She squinted, smirking. That's what they all say." Lydia rolled her eyes, trying to stifle her laugh. For the first time in years, laughter didn't feel like a betrayal of her loneliness. It felt like waking up. Later that evening, Lydia finds a photograph slipped under her shop door, a portrait of her smiling, one she never posed for. And at the bottom corner, in small handwriting, it reads, "For the woman who waited for the rain to stop." The sun barely broke through the clouds that afternoon when Ethan appeared outside Lydia's shop again. He had that same restless energy, that same mysterious charm that made her forget how long she'd been waiting for something, or someone to wake her life up. "You trust me?" he asked out of nowhere, his camera slung over his shoulder. Lydia blinked, caught off guard. I don't even know you, she said, half smiling. Good, he replied. Then this might actually work. Before she could answer, he gestured toward his car. Come with me. There's something you need to see. The drive was quiet except for the soft hum of rain on the windshield. The landscape unfolded in shades of green and gray, rolling hills, endless meadows, and the ghostly outline of distant mountains. Lydia watched the scenery pass like a memory she'd known. Where are we going? She finally asked. Ethan smiled without looking at her. To a place people don't find on maps. A place where silence tells the truth. His words unsettled her, but not out of fear. It was the kind of uncertainty that felt alive. They stopped at the edge of Loch Farleen, a vast and quiet lake surrounded by whispering pines. The air was thick with the smell of rain and wild heather. Lydia stepped out, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. It's beautiful, she whispered. Ethan adjusted his camera, but didn't lift it. I bring my lens here when I can't make sense of the world, he said. The water doesn't ask questions. It just reflects whatever's real. Lydia looked out across the loch. The still water mirrored the gray sky perfectly. Maybe that's why people are afraid of reflections, she murmured. They show us what we've been avoiding. Ethan finally raised his camera. Turn around, he said softly. Lydia hesitated. Why? Because I want to capture what healing looks like, he replied. She gave a small, nervous laugh but turned anyway. The shutter clicked. Once, twice, then again. You look like someone who remembers how to breathe, Ethan said behind the lens. Lydia's throat tightened. And what if I've forgotten? She asked. He lowered the camera, his voice barely above the wind. Then we'll remember together. As the evening fog began to settle, Lydia sat on a rock, watching ripples dance across the water. You remind me of my husband, she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond at first. Then, with a slow exhale, he said, That's not always a bad thing, unless he broke you. She looked at him sharply, but his gaze wasn't cruel, just knowing. He didn't break me, she said. He just left me unfinished. Ethan nodded. Then let's finish something today. He reached into his bag and pulled out a second camera, smaller, older, and handed it to her. Show me what you see. Lydia hesitated, then lifted it toward the horizon. For the first time in years, she didn't just exist, she looked. As they drive back, Lydia glances at Ethan's camera resting on his lap. The screen flickers, and for a split second, she sees an image that freezes her heart. A photograph of Richard, her missing husband, taken years after he vanished. The moment they returned to town, Lydia couldn't stop replaying that flicker in her mind, the image she swore she saw on Ethan's camera screen. Richard's face. Older, weary, but unmistakably him. She hadn't seen his eyes in 5 years, and yet that frozen half-second had been enough to send her stomach into knots. Ethan parked outside the shop, oblivious to the storm behind her silence. You okay? He asked. Lydia forced a nod. Just tired. He smiled faintly. Then rest. Tomorrow, I'll show you the falls near Glen Affric. She didn't answer. Her pulse was too loud. She needed to know what he was hiding. That night, after locking the shop and sending Emma to bed, Lydia pulled out an old wooden box from her wardrobe. Inside were stacks of yellowing envelopes, letters she'd written to Richard after he disappeared. None were ever mailed. Each one began the same. My dear Richard, I don't know if you're alive. Her handwriting trembled more with each year. She read the last letter she'd written 2 months ago. If you can still feel anything, remember, I never stopped waiting. The tears came quietly, the kind that leave no sound. But tonight, waiting no longer felt noble. It felt like decay. The next morning, Lydia walked to the cafe near the river, the one where Margaret always sat gossiping by the window. She spotted Ethan outside, hunched over his camera, scrolling through photos. Her heart raced. Morning, he said, looking up. She smiled, pretending to be calm. Can I see? He hesitated, then turned the camera toward her. Photo after photo appeared, landscapes, portraits of locals, even a few of her by the loch. Nothing unusual, until he reached one last folder. He paused. His thumb hovered over the screen, then quickly scrolled past it. But Lydia saw enough. The same photo again. Richard. Standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. Who is that? Lydia's voice cracked like brittle glass. Ethan froze. What? The man in that photo. You skipped past it. Ethan's face tightened. You saw that? Lydia's heart was thundering now. It looked like my husband, Ethan. Why do you have his picture? The cafe's noise faded into silence between them. After a long pause, Ethan sighed, setting the camera down. Because I met him, he said quietly. Lydia felt the world tilt. That's impossible. His eyes didn't waver.
No, Lydia.
It's not. I met him in Marseille 3 years ago. Ethan's voice was low, almost apologetic. He was lost. Said he was running from something he couldn't fix. I never got his full name. He called himself RM and spent his nights staring at the sea. I didn't realize who he was until I saw your face yesterday. Lydia could barely breathe. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Because I wasn't sure. And because I didn't come to Scotland for photos, I came to find you. He asked me to. Lydia's world stopped. Her hands trembled on the table as she whispered, Richard sent you? Ethan nodded. He said you deserve to know the truth. That night, Lydia opens one of her old letters again, and for the first time, realizes she may not have been writing to a ghost after all. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. The truth sat heavy in her chest, heavier than any nightmare she'd ever known. Richard was alive, or had been 3 years ago. Every heartbeat since Ethan's confession sounded like betrayal. She paced the room, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor, mind spinning with questions. Why hadn't Richard come home? Why send a stranger instead? Ethan's words echoed through her head. He said you deserved to know the truth. But what truth? And why now? She turned to the window. Outside, the rain had returned, relentless, as if the sky itself was grieving with her. By morning, exhaustion had painted her eyes dull. She didn't go to the bookstore. Instead, she walked straight to Ethan's inn. The smell of rain-soaked stone and coffee filled the small lobby. When he saw her standing there, no makeup, no hesitation, he seemed to brace himself. I owe you the truth, he said quietly. He led her upstairs to his room. On the desk were dozens of photographs scattered like pieces of memory. Children, old couples, strangers, faces of the lost. But one image sat framed in the center, the same photograph Lydia had seen flicker on his camera. Ethan handed her the frame, without speaking. Lydia's hands trembled as she lifted it. It was Richard, older, thinner, eyes tired but unmistakably him. He stood beside a small fishing boat, sunlight burning behind him. But what froze her completely was the woman standing next to him, dark-haired, holding his hand. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. He started a new life, she whispered. Ethan's eyes softened. He told me he loved you, he said. But he couldn't come back. He thought his disappearance would free you. Lydia laughed bitterly, tears spilling. Free me? He left me chained to a ghost. She set the frame down slowly, her voice trembling. Why would you bring this to me, Ethan? To break what little I had left. Ethan stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. Because that's not the whole story. He was dying when I met him. Lydia froze. What? He had heart failure, Ethan continued. He knew he wouldn't make it long. He asked me to find you, to give you something. Ethan reached into his camera bag and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed and worn. Lydia's name was written across it in Richard's handwriting. For a moment, time itself stopped. Her fingers hovered above the paper, like it might burn her. She opened it slowly, her breath shallow. Inside was a photograph, not of him, but of her. A candid shot taken years ago at the Inverness Pier. She was laughing, looking at the sea, unaware of the camera. On the back, written in Richard's familiar script, were the words, I never left you, Lydia. I only wanted you to remember how to live without me. The tears came quietly at first, then broke free like the rain outside. Ethan stepped forward, resting a hesitant hand on her shoulder. He told me to find the woman in this photo, he said softly. To remind her that love doesn't vanish, it just changes form. Lydia turned to him, eyes filled with disbelief and pain. And what are you to him, Ethan? He met her gaze steadily. Just the messenger, but maybe something more now. That night, Lydia sits by her window with Richard's photo in one hand and Ethan's camera in the other, torn between the man who vanished and the stranger who found her. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought blooms. Maybe her heart isn't done loving. By the next morning, the storm had passed, but the silence that followed carried a different kind of weight. Lydia tried to go about her day, opening the bookstore and pretending life was ordinary again. But as soon as she stepped outside, she felt it, the shift. The way Mrs. Campbell from across the street paused mid-step when she saw Ethan leaving Lydia's house early that morning. The way two old men at the bakery stopped talking as she entered. Inverwick was small, the kind of town that fed on stories, and Lydia's life had just become its favorite new tale. At the counter, Margaret, her sharp-tongued neighbor and loyal friend, was already waiting, arms folded. So, she began, eyebrows raised, the mysterious photographer is now your early morning guest? Lydia sighed, rubbing her temple. He just brought me something my husband left behind. Margaret snorted. Oh, darling, that's exactly what they all say before scandal hits the church pews. Despite her sarcasm, Lydia could hear the worry behind her words. She knew Margaret wasn't cruel, just protective. I can handle it, Lydia said softly. He's not what they think. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to keep his distance. But small towns have long memories and short patience. Everywhere he went, the pub, the bakery, even the inn, eyes followed him. To them, he wasn't a stranger anymore. He was the man with Lydia. One evening, while photographing the pier, a group of fishermen muttered as he passed. That's him, the Englishman who's got our Lydia all tangled. He ignored them, focusing his lens on the horizon, but their laughter chased him down the dock like an accusation. For the first time, he wondered if he'd done more harm than good by finding her. Later that night, Lydia found Ethan sitting alone outside the inn, camera resting on his lap, his expression clouded. You shouldn't listen to them, she said softly, approaching him. He gave a faint smile. Hard not to, when the whole town talks louder than the waves. Lydia sat beside him, folding her hands. They don't understand. You came here for truth, not trouble. Ethan looked at her, his eyes warm but conflicted. Maybe, but truth has a cost, doesn't it? And I'm not sure which one of us is paying it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intimate, heavy with things neither dared to say aloud. A few days later, things took a turn. A letter appeared at Lydia's doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside, one line written in neat script. People talk because they see what you're hiding. Her hands shook as she read it. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, the edges damp from the morning mist. Fear crept up her spine. She looked across the street and caught Mrs. Campbell watching from her window, the curtain twitching like a heartbeat. That night, Lydia locked every door and window for the first time in years. The world outside suddenly felt colder, not from the wind, but from judgment. Lydia burns the letter that night, watching the flames swallow every cruel word. But as the ashes fall, she feels a chill. Someone out there knows more than they should. And maybe, just maybe, her husband's past wasn't buried after all. That night, the wind howled through Inverwick like an old spirit refusing to rest. Lydia couldn't sleep. Her mind was tangled in whispers and the ghost of that letter. She sat by her window, watching the rain bead against the glass, when suddenly, the silence broke. Her phone rang. Once. Twice. Her heart jumped. Unknown number. Against every instinct, she answered. Hello, she whispered. For a moment, nothing. Then, a voice, deep, tired, unmistakable. Lydia. Her breath froze. Richard. The world went quiet except for the distant sound of waves. Don't trust him, the voice rasped. He isn't who you think. Then the line went dead. For a long moment, she sat frozen, phone trembling in her hand. Logic screamed that it couldn't be him. He was gone. Yet that voice, she would know it anywhere. Her pulse raced as she replayed every word in her mind. Don't trust him. Him, Ethan. The thought struck like lightning. Could Richard be alive? Could Ethan have lied? The rain battered the window harder, as if echoing her confusion. She glanced at the envelope still lying on her desk, the handwriting, the photo, the words that once brought closure. But now they have only opened new wounds. By morning, the storm had passed, but Lydia's world hadn't calmed. She found herself walking through Inverwick's misty streets toward the inn. Her reflection followed her in every puddle, haunted, unsure. When Ethan opened the door, his smile faded at the sight of her face. "What happened?" he asked, voice soft. Lydia didn't answer right away. She simply held up her phone. "He called," she whispered. Ethan blinked. "Who?" "Richard. He said not to trust you." For a second, Ethan said nothing. Then he stepped back, disbelief painted across his face. "That's not possible, Lydia." "Don't lie to me, Ethan," she said, voice shaking. "You said he was dying." "I didn't lie," he replied, calm but firm. "I saw the medical papers. I saw him collapse." Lydia's heart pounded. "Then explain how he's calling me." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "Maybe someone's pretending. Maybe someone knows about the envelope." His tone was steady, but she saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. "Who would do that?" she whispered. He hesitated. "Someone who doesn't want the truth out." Lydia's gaze hardened. "Then help me find out who." That night, Ethan brought his camera to Lydia's house. "If someone's been here, maybe they left a trace," he said. He set up his lens near the window, photographing faint footprints outside in the mud. The flash lit up the darkness. Once, twice. Lydia stood behind him, arms folded, heart racing with every click. When he zoomed in on the image, her blood ran cold. A shape stood faintly in the reflection of the glass, a man in a coat, watching from across the street. "When was this taken?" Lydia whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Just now." They both turned to the window, but the street was empty. Lydia's world has cracked open again, her husband's voice, a stranger's warning, and now, a watcher in the dark. But as fear coils tighter around her, one truth becomes clear. Someone in Inverwick is playing with her past. And this time, it might cost her life. The next morning, the fog sat heavy over Inverwick, thicker than usual, the kind that blurred shapes into ghosts. Lydia stood at her window, the night's events replaying in her head like a broken film reel. She hadn't slept. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind against the shutters made her flinch. The photo Ethan captured, that shadowed figure, wouldn't leave her mind. Who was watching them? And why now, after all these years of silence? She stepped outside into the cold mist, her breath visible, the cobblestones slick underfoot. Somewhere in that gray haze, someone was watching. She could feel it. At the pier, Ethan was already waiting. He had dark circles under his eyes, the camera bag slung over his shoulder like a shield. "You didn't sleep either," Lydia said quietly. "Didn't feel like a good night for dreams," he replied. Together, they retraced their steps from the night before. The pier was slick with sea spray, ropes creaking against wooden posts. Ethan crouched near a puddle where faint footprints led toward the dock, larger than his, deeper. He photographed them carefully. "He's been watching us from here," he murmured. "Whoever he is, he wanted us to know." Suddenly, a faint rustling came from behind the boat shed. Lydia turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded, signaling for silence. He moved slowly toward the sound, camera in hand. The fog shifted like a curtain, revealing nothing but empty crates and rope. Then, snap! A wooden plank creaked behind them. Lydia spun around. A dark figure darted through the mist, fast and silent. Ethan shouted, "Hey!" and sprinted after him. Lydia hesitated for half a second before following. Her heart hammered in her chest as she chased the echo of footsteps down the pier until nothing. Just fog and the sound of distant waves crashing. When Ethan finally stopped, breathless, he pointed to the ground. A small silver locket lay half-buried in the wet planks. Lydia bent to pick it up, hands trembling. Inside was a photograph, her, taken years ago, the same one Richard had once kept in his wallet.
Her throat went dry.
This was his, she whispered. Ethan's voice lowered. Then whoever's watching us isn't just a stranger. It's someone who knows your past. Lydia closed the locket and held it tight against her chest. He's playing games, she said bitterly. And he's using Richard's ghost to do it. That evening, the whispers began again. As Lydia walked home, she heard faint footsteps echoing hers, always a few paces behind, never close enough to see. Once inside, she bolted the door and drew the curtains, her hands shaking. The phone on her table buzzed once, a new message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have gone to the pier. No name. No punctuation.
Just that line.
Lydia dropped the phone, her pulse roaring in her ears. The shadows on her walls seemed to move, stretching with the flicker of the fireplace. And somewhere outside, unseen in the dark, a camera clicked. Someone is watching Lydia, someone who knows her past, her photos, even her fear. And as she stares into the darkness, one haunting question keeps her awake. What if Richard never died and never left? Morning came with an eerie stillness, the kind that felt staged, as if the entire town was holding its breath. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, coffee gone cold, phone lying silent beside her. She'd hardly slept, the words from that message still echoing in her head. You shouldn't have gone to the pier. Her eyes darted toward the window every few minutes, half expecting to see that figure again. When Ethan knocked, she jumped. He stood there, pale, clutching his camera. I found something, he said simply. Lydia hesitated before letting him in, unsure whether to fear the man or the truth he carried. Ethan placed his camera on the table and began scrolling through the photos from the pier. I went back early, he said. Something felt off about that reflection in the glass. He turned the screen toward her. The image showed the window from her living room the night before, and there it was again. The same silhouette. But this time, when he zoomed in, something new appeared, a glint near the figure's hand, a camera just like his. Lydia leaned in, heart pounding. He's photographing us? Ethan nodded grimly. It's a message. Whoever it is wants us to see him. I developed the negatives from my last roll, too, Ethan added, reaching into his bag. And there's something else. He handed her a small strip of film, still damp from processing. This one wasn't mine, he said. Lydia frowned. What do you mean? It was inside the camera when I first found it in my bag that night at the pier. He slipped it into the light projector he'd borrowed from the inn. The beam flickered onto the wall, revealing a blurry photograph of the Inverwick Harbor, dated 2 years ago. And standing at the far end of the dock, unmistakable even in shadow, was Richard. Lydia's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair. That's impossible, she whispered. He was already dead. Ethan stared at the photo, jaw tight. Unless he faked it. Lydia shook her head violently. Richard wouldn't, but the memory of that mysterious call interrupted her thoughts. Don't trust him. Could it have been a warning from the living or the dead? She looked back at Ethan. If he's alive, then why all this? Ethan hesitated. Maybe he's trying to tell you something. Or someone doesn't want you to find out what happened. The unease in his voice matched the cold crawling up her spine. That evening, Ethan suggested they take the photo to the only person who might remember, Detective Fraser, the retired officer who once handled Richard's missing case. They found him at a pub by the docks, nursing a pint, eyes like weathered glass. When Lydia laid the photo before him, he froze mid-sip. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. He's supposed to be dead. Lydia leaned forward. You mean you knew? Fraser's jaw clenched. I saw him. After the search was called off. But I was told to drop it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. By who? Fraser looked at them both, his voice low. By someone who still lives here. The truth has finally cracked open. Richard's death wasn't what it seemed, and someone in Inverwick made sure it stayed buried. As Lydia stares at the photo on the pub table, One thought chills her to the bone. The man in the photograph isn't just from her past, he might still be watching. The pub had fallen silent after Fraser's words. The faint hum of the sea and the crackle from the fireplace filled the air as Lydia's mind raced. Someone who still lives here. The thought made her stomach twist. Ethan leaned forward, his tone careful. "Detective, you can't just drop that and walk away. Who told you to stop looking for Richard?" Fraser took a slow sip of his beer before answering, eyes fixed on the glass. "I was threatened," he muttered. Back then, the town council had deep pockets, and one man had longer reach than anyone, Mayor Callum Dray. Lydia frowned. "The same man who funds the harbor restoration?" Fraser nodded grimly. "A man who hides his sins beneath good deeds." "Mayor Dray was close to Richard," Fraser continued. "Too close. They worked together before Richard vanished. He ran a construction project out by the North Docks, the one that mysteriously burned down." Lydia blinked. "That fire killed 2 people. Fraser's eyes lifted slowly. "That's what the report said. But there were 3 names on the site ledger. Richard's was one of them." Silence pressed between them. Lydia's fingers tightened around the photo. "You're saying my husband didn't die in an accident? He disappeared because of Dray?" Fraser exhaled. "I'm saying he saw something he shouldn't have." They left the pub in near silence, the chill of the night biting harder than usual. The fog rolled in thick, swallowing the streets in gray. "So the mayor's involved," Ethan said, adjusting his coat. Lydia nodded slowly. "If Richard discovered something illegal, Dray could have made him disappear." Ethan frowned. "Then who's sending the calls and letters?" Lydia's voice trembled. "Someone trying to finish what Dray started." For the first time, she wasn't sure if Richard was alive, or if his ghost was screaming for justice through someone else's hands. The next morning, Lydia couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. She and Ethan drove to the mayor's estate, an imposing stone manor overlooking the harbor. The gate was open, the lawn glistening with dew. "He won't talk to us," Ethan murmured. "Then we'll make him," Lydia replied, her voice colder than the wind. Inside, the mayor greeted them with a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. McAllister," he said smoothly, "I was so sorry about your husband." Lydia met his gaze, steady and sharp.
"Funny.
"You didn't sound sorry when you paid to bury his name." The smile vanished. "Careful," he warned softly. Ethan took a step forward.
"We have a photo," he said.
"One that says Richard might still be alive." For a flicker of a moment, Dray's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes darting just slightly, enough for Lydia to see guilt hiding behind power. "I'd be careful what stories you chase," he said, voice low. "Sometimes, truth buries more than lies." Lydia stepped closer. "If you had anything to do with his disappearance, I'll find out." Dray leaned back with a smirk that chilled her blood. "Mrs. McAllister, you already have. Haven't you wondered why your friend, Mr. Cole, knows so much?" Ethan froze. "What are you implying?" Dray smiled thinly. "Ask him where he got that camera." The world around Lydia tilts again. The enemy she thought was clear now blurs into gray. If the mayor's words hold true, Ethan's connection to Richard runs deeper than he's admitted. And as they leave that mansion, one truth becomes undeniable. Someone is lying. But this time, it might be the man standing right beside her. The car ride back from the mayor's estate was a silent battlefield. The tires hummed over the wet road, the wind howling through the highlands as Lydia's thoughts spiraled like a storm. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, knuckles pale against the steering wheel. "You're awfully quiet," he murmured, trying to sound calm. Lydia didn't look at him. "Should I be talking to a man who's been lying to me?" His jaw tightened. "You think I'm working with him?" Lydia turned sharply. "The mayor knew your name. He knew about your camera, Ethan. Why?" The car stopped near a cliff overlooking the cold North Sea. Waves crashed violently below, mirroring the chaos inside Lydia's chest. Ethan stepped out, rain soaking his hair as he turned to face her. "You deserve the truth," he said. "But it's not what you think." Lydia crossed her arms, trembling. "Then tell me before I start believing him." Ethan took a long breath, his voice breaking through the wind. "I met Richard McAllister 3 years ago, not as your husband, but as a dying man who wanted to disappear." Lydia froze. "What did you just say?" Ethan's words tumbled out, heavy and jagged. "I was photographing the dock fire for a paper in Glasgow. Richard was there that night. He came to me, burned and terrified, begging for help. He said the mayor was laundering money through fake projects, and he had proof. He knew they'd come for him next." Lydia's eyes filled with disbelief. "So, you helped him vanish?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I gave him my backup passport, told him to leave the country. He promised he'd send for you when it was safe." Lydia's voice broke. "And you never told me?" Ethan's eyes glistened. "I didn't know who you were until I saw your photo in his old wallet." The revelation cut through Lydia like cold steel. "So you came here pretending to help me, while knowing everything?" Ethan's voice trembled.
No.
"I came here because Richard asked me to. His last letter said, if anything ever happened to him, I should find you and make sure you got this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a weathered brown envelope, its edges water-stained and worn. Lydia hesitated, staring at it as if it were a ghost. Inside was a single piece of paper, a map, and a note in her husband's handwriting. "For Lydia. Tell her I'm sorry." Tears mixed with the rain on Lydia's face as the reality sank in. Her husband hadn't abandoned her. He had run to protect her. And Ethan, the man she'd learned to trust, had carried that secret like a burden carved into his heart. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. Ethan's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid you'd see me as part of the lie. But Lydia, I swear to you, I never stopped looking for him." Lydia looked up, eyes fierce with pain and determination. "Then we'll find him together. No more secrets, Ethan. No more lies." The storm had finally broken, but in its wake came clarity and danger. Somewhere in the shadows of Scotland's coast, the truth about Richard still waited to be unearthed. But now Lydia had something stronger than fear, a partner who once helped her husband vanish and might be the only one who can bring him back. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 straight days. Lydia sat by the fireplace in her cottage, the old map spread across the table like a curse waiting to be read. Ethan paced nearby, restless. "It's not just any map," he murmured, tracing the faded ink with his finger. "These markings, they lead to Glen Torrin, near the old quarry." Lydia looked up sharply. "That's where Richard used to take Emma to watch the sunset." Ethan nodded. "Then that's where we start." Lydia's hand trembled as she folded the paper. "If this leads to him, alive or not, I have to know." They set out before dawn, the fog thick as a dream, the highlands stretching endlessly before them. Lydia drove while Ethan followed the map, each bend of the road carrying them deeper into forgotten terrain. "Richard marked something here," Ethan said, pointing to a symbol shaped like an X near a cluster of hills. "Looks like an old mine entrance." Lydia's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "That quarry's been closed for years. Locals say it's haunted." Ethan smirked faintly. "Then it's the perfect place to hide a truth no one wanted found." The quarry was colder than the rest of the valley. Abandoned machinery lay rusting under the gray sky. The air smelled of iron and wet earth. Lydia's boots sank into the mud as they walked toward a tunnel half buried in moss and stone. "He was here," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan lifted his flashlight. "There's something inside." They ducked into the dark, beams of light cutting through the damp air. Then Lydia saw it, a wooden crate marked with the initials RM, dust-covered and untouched for years. "Richard McAllister," Ethan breathed. "He left this for you." Lydia knelt, heart hammering as she pried open the crate. Inside were documents sealed in plastic, a flash drive, and a small black notebook. Ethan picked it up and flipped through financial ledgers, signatures, and coded transactions linking Mayor Dre to shell companies across Europe. "This is it," he whispered. "This could ruin him." Lydia's hand brushed over the final item, a photograph of her, Richard, and Emma at the harbor years ago. A note was scribbled on the back. "If they find me, tell Lydia to finish what I started." Lydia felt tears burning behind her eyes. "He never stopped fighting," she said softly. A sudden sound echoed from outside, gravel shifting under boots. Ethan instantly turned off the flashlight. Lydia froze. Voices drifted through the tunnel mouth. Check inside. The mayor wants everything destroyed. Ethan grabbed Lydia's hand. We have to move, now. They slipped through a side passage as two men with flashlights entered. Lydia's pulse thundered. They crawled through a narrow crevice that led back toward the cliffs. As they reached daylight again, Lydia clutched the crate's contents close to her chest. He left us the truth, she gasped. And they're still trying to bury it. Ethan glanced back, jaw tight. Then we make sure the world sees it before they find us. They reached the safety of the forest ridge just as the sun broke through the mist. Lydia clutched the notebook, her knuckles white. Somewhere behind them, the men's voices echoed in frustration. The secret her husband died to protect was finally in her hands, but now the hunters knew she existed. And this time, they weren't going to let her walk away. The forest exploded with movement. Lydia and Ethan sprinted through the wet underbrush, branches slapping their faces, hearts pounding louder than the wind. Behind them, the sharp beams of flashlights flickered through the trees. Dre's men were closing in. They're splitting up, Ethan shouted, grabbing Lydia's hand. Keep low. The rain had turned the ground slick, every step a battle to stay upright. Lydia's lungs burned, but she didn't let go of the envelope pressed against her chest. That envelope held her husband's last fight, and her only reason to keep running. They reached an open glen, mist rising from the ground like ghosts. Ethan pointed to an old shepherd's hut in the distance. There. We can lose them there. They stumbled inside, slamming the door quietly behind them. The smell of damp wood and earth filled the air. Lydia pressed her back against the wall, chest heaving. How did they find us so fast? Ethan looked out through a crack in the boards. Dre must have trackers in his vehicles, or he's got eyes everywhere. Lydia clenched her jaw. Then he won't rest until we're silenced. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Ethan motioned for silence and slipped to the window. Two men in dark coats passed by, scanning the ground. One spoke into a radio, negative at the hut, moving to the cliffs. When their voices faded, Lydia exhaled shakily. Ethan crouched beside her. We can't stay here. They'll circle back. Lydia nodded, holding out the flash drive. We need to get this to someone who'll expose it. Detective Fraser. He's the only one we can trust. Ethan's expression hardened. Then we go through the mountain road. It's risky, but it's faster. By dawn, the rain had turned to mist. The mountains loomed like sleeping beasts, their peaks hidden in cloud. Ethan's old Land Rover coughed to life as Lydia climbed in. The road ahead was narrow, cutting through cliffs and valleys. For a while, silence stretched between them until Lydia spoke softly. If we make it through this, what happens after? Ethan gave a sad smile. You tell your daughter the truth. And you live the life he wanted you to. Lydia stared out at the horizon. And you? He hesitated. I was part of the lie, Lydia. Maybe this is my way of setting things right.
But fate wasn't done with them yet.
As they rounded a sharp bend, a black SUV appeared ahead, blocking the road. Hold on, Ethan shouted, swerving as bullets shattered the windshield. The car spun into the mud. Lydia screamed as glass rained down. Ethan grabbed her arm. Out now. They scrambled behind a boulder as gunfire echoed through the cliffs. They'll kill us for what's in that drive. Lydia cried. Ethan peeked over the rock, jaw clenched. Then they'll have to go through me first. He tossed a smoke flare from his bag. It hissed violently, flooding the road with thick white fog. Run, Lydia. Through the smoke, Lydia ran, clutching the flash drive, heart pounding like thunder. Ethan's silhouette disappeared behind the haze, gunfire echoing through the mist. She didn't look back. Somewhere beyond those cliffs, truth waited for daylight, and she'd die before letting it vanish again. The cliffs roared with the sound of crashing waves and echoing gunfire. Lydia stumbled over the jagged rocks, the cold sea wind slicing through her clothes. Her legs trembled, lungs burning with fear and exhaustion. Every few seconds she looked back, praying to see Ethan emerging from the smoke. But only shadows moved in the distance. "Please, God, let him be alive," she whispered to herself, clutching the flash drive so tightly it dug into her palm. Behind her, the SUV's engine revved one last time, and then there was silence. The fog began to thin, revealing the narrow footpath winding toward the sea caves. Lydia ducked inside one, the walls slick with salt and moss. She leaned against the stone, panting hard. Her reflection shimmered in the shallow tide pooling at her feet, a woman broken, but not defeated. "You've survived worse," she muttered, forcing herself to breathe. Then a sound, a groan, echoed from deeper within the cave. Lydia froze, every muscle locking in place. "Ethan?" she whispered, voice trembling. The echo answered back, faint but real. She followed the sound, each step hesitant but hopeful. The cave opened into a larger chamber where light from a crack in the ceiling illuminated the rocks. Ethan lay slumped against the wall, his shirt stained dark with blood. Lydia gasped, rushing to him. "Ethan! Oh my God!" His eyes fluttered open, weak but still filled with fire. "You made it out." Lydia pressed her hands against his wound. "You're bleeding too much." He gave a faint smile. "I told you, I'd buy you time." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not dying here. Not after everything we've been through." Ethan's breath came shallow, but his hand found hers. "Lydia, oh listen. There's something I didn't tell you." She shook her head. "Save your strength." "No," he insisted. "That night at the docks, Richard didn't just run. He left someone behind."
Me.
Lydia froze, confusion twisting in her gut. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's voice cracked. "I'm his brother." The world tilted. Lydia's heartbeat stopped for a second. "His brother?" Ethan nodded weakly. "Different mothers. He wanted to protect you from the truth. He didn't want his past to drag you down with him." Lydia's tears are flowing freely now, mixing with the salt water beneath them. "All this time you were family." Ethan's hand trembled in hers. "He loved you, Lydia. Everything he did, even disappearing, was to keep you safe. He wanted you to move on, to live again." His voice faded, barely a whisper. "Promise me you'll finish what he started." Lydia shook her head, sobbing. "Don't you dare leave me too." But Ethan's eyes began to close, peace softening his features. "Tell Emma her uncle kept his promise." Then silence. Only the waves remained, crashing against the rocks like a heartbeat fading into the sea. Lydia sat beside Ethan's body for hours, the tide rising around her, his final words echoing in her mind. "Promise me you'll finish what he started." When she finally stood, she looked out toward the sea, and something inside her changed. She wasn't running anymore. She was going to fight. The Highland sky hung heavy with gray clouds as Lydia trudged back into town. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, but her eyes burned with purpose. Every step she took left a trail of sea salt and sorrow on the cobbled streets. The flash drive was hidden deep inside her jacket, close to her heart. Ethan's blood still stained her sleeve. She didn't care who saw her now. "You took my husband," she whispered under her breath. "You took his brother. But you won't take the truth." She reached the police station just after noon. Detective Fraser looked up from his desk and froze. "Lydia, you look like hell." "I found what he died for," she said flatly, placing the flash drive on his desk. Fraser frowned. "What is this?" "Proof," she replied. "Everything Richard uncovered about Mayor Dre." He hesitated, glancing toward the door. "You shouldn't be here. There are people watching." Lydia's voice rose, raw and trembling. "I've been watched my whole life. I'm done hiding." Fraser inserted the drive into his computer, and as the files opened, his expression hardened. "Good God," he whispered. "You were right." The screen displayed financial records, hidden accounts, offshore transfers, every thread of corruption tied to Dre's empire. Lydia leaned forward, pointing. "This one, that's the Burn Dock project. He funneled money through a company Richard helped manage." Fraser scrolled faster. "He's been laundering government funds for nearly a decade." and killing anyone who got close. He looked up at her, eyes grim. If this goes public, it'll destroy him. Lydia's voice was steady now.
Good.
Then maybe Ethan didn't die for nothing. But just as Fraser reached for the printer, the lights flickered. Then blackout. Lydia's pulse spiked. What happened? Backup power's out too, Fraser said, grabbing his gun. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Lydia froze. He knows we're here. Fraser motioned for silence, stepping toward the door. A shadow passed the frosted glass window. Then the door burst open. 2 men in suits stormed in. Fraser fired once, dropping one, but the second lunged. Lydia ducked, grabbing the flash drive as it flew off the desk. She sprinted toward the back exit. Go! Fraser shouted. Get it out of here. Lydia burst into the alley, rain hitting her face like needles. Tires screeched nearby, a black car blocking her escape. She turned the other way, sprinting through puddles, clutching the drive like a lifeline. Somewhere behind her, a voice shouted, "She's got it. Don't let her leave town." She darted into the narrow street that led toward the harbor. Breath ragged, heart racing, she whispered to herself, "Hold on, Ethan. I'll finish this. I swear I will." Behind her, the church bells tolled, a haunting sound that mixed with sirens, gunfire, and the storm. Lydia vanished into the maze of the harbor, the flash drive still safe, but barely. Detective Fraser was gone. Dre's men were closing in. And somewhere, beneath the thunder, the truth her husband died to protect was screaming to be heard. Now, it wasn't just about justice. It was survival. The harbor lights flickered like dying stars against the storm. Lydia's shoes slapped against the wet cobblestone as she stumbled into a narrow lane between 2 warehouses. Her lungs burned. Rain soaked through her coat, blurring her vision, but she didn't stop. The cafe at the pier, the Blue Gull, was still open, its sign glowing dimly through the fog. Just a few more steps, she gasped. Upload the files and this. But as she reached for the door, she caught a reflection in the window, a silhouette behind her, watching. She pushed into the cafe, the bell above the door jingling faintly. The few customers barely looked up, a fisherman sipping whiskey, an old woman knitting near the counter. Lydia slid into the farthest corner, her hands trembling as she opened her laptop. The flash drive clicked in. A loading bar appeared. Uploading, 3%. Her heart pounded. She glanced around. Every sound, a spoon clinking, a chair creaking, felt like a threat. Then the door opened again, and a man in a charcoal coat entered, shaking rain from his hat. He lifted his gaze and smiled at her. "Mrs. McAllister," the man said softly, approaching her table. "You've been busy." Lydia's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" "A messenger," he replied, slipping into the seat opposite her. "Mayor Dre sends his regards." The words made her throat tighten. "Tell your boss it's over. The world will see what he did." The man's smile didn't fade. "That's the problem with truth, Lydia. It rarely survives long enough to be seen." His hand moved under the table. She froze. "You're not walking out of here with that drive." Uploading, 64%. Lydia's fingers hovered above the keyboard. "You can hurt me," she whispered, "but you can't stop the upload." The man leaned closer. "You think the cafe Wi-Fi can save you? You're still in my town." Then, a low click echoed beneath the table, his gun cocked. Lydia's pulse spiked. "You won't shoot here," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "Too many witnesses." The man smiled faintly. "They won't remember anything. Fear has a way of blurring faces." Then chaos. The cafe door slammed open. Detective Fraser stumbled in, bleeding, drenched, his gun drawn. "Step away from her," he shouted. The man turned sharply, aiming, but Fraser fired first. The shot rang through the cafe, glass shattering, people screaming. Lydia ducked as the stranger fell, blood pooling across the tiles. Fraser staggered forward. "You okay?" "It's almost done," she gasped, turning back to the screen. Uploading, 98%. He managed a weak smile. "Then finish it." Seconds later, The bar hit 100%. A soft chime echoed. Lydia exhaled. It's done. But before relief could sink in, Fraser collapsed. Lydia caught him, her hands trembling. Fraser, stay with me. He coughed, eyes dimming. He wasn't alone. Outside, headlights flared. More black cars pulling up by the dock. Lydia's heart froze. She looked around the cafe, terrified faces, trembling hands. She knew she couldn't stay. She wiped the tears from her face, grabbed the flash drive, and whispered, "Thank you, Fraser." Then she bolted out the back door, vanishing into the storm once more. The evidence was live. The world would soon see everything. But Lydia wasn't safe, not yet. Dre would come himself now. And in the heart of the storm, the final reckoning awaited her. The storm swallowed the harbor in thunder and shadow. Lydia ran through the soaked streets, clutching the flash drive though she knew it no longer mattered. The truth was already out there. But her instinct screamed, "He's coming." She reached the cliffside road that led to the old lighthouse, the one Richard used to photograph at dawn. The sea crashed below like a warning. Every gust of wind carried a whisper of danger. Then she saw them, headlights snaking up the hill behind her. Black cars. Multiple. The mayor had arrived. Inside the lighthouse, Lydia slammed the heavy door shut and bolted it. The interior smelled of rust, salt, and memory. She collapsed against the wall, panting, drenched. For a moment, she looked around, the old lantern glass cracked, the beams still flickering faintly. Richard had loved this place. She whispered, "You chose this hill for a reason, didn't you?" Her trembling hand brushed over the words he had carved into the wall years ago. Truth never dies in silence. She bit her lip hard, whispering, "Then neither will I." Outside, the cars stopped. Doors slammed. Mayor Dre stepped out, his expensive coat whipping in the wind. He looked up at the lighthouse, his face illuminated by lightning. "Lydia McAllister." His voice carried through the storm like thunder. "You've caused me enough trouble. Let's talk, no more running." Lydia's chest tightened. She could hear the echo of his arrogance in every word. "You think you can scare me now," she whispered. Then, louder. "You killed my husband. You destroyed everything I had. And you want to talk?" Her voice cracked through the wind. He smiled faintly. Richard made his choices.
He could have joined me.
But he got greedy. Lydia's heart twisted. "You liar." Dre took a step closer, his voice calm but cold. "Your husband was a good man, but he couldn't live with what he'd done. You should thank me for ending his pain." Lydia froze, her blood turning to ice. What are you saying?" Dre's eyes glinted with cruelty. "He didn't die in an accident, Lydia. He jumped. After he realized what he'd become." Lydia's breath caught. "No, you're lying." But deep down, she knew there had always been something strange about Richard's last letter. The one that never sounded like him. She shook her head violently. "You forged that letter. You staged everything." Dre tilted his head. "Believe what you like. The truth doesn't change the outcome." He raised his gun. "You've done your part. Now you can join him." Lydia's pulse thundered. She turned, darting up the spiral staircase as a bullet shattered the glass door behind her. She reached the lantern room at the top, the storm raging so hard the tower swayed. She looked out, the sea below boiling with white foam, the horizon a blur. Then she saw it, a small fishing boat fighting the waves. A voice echoed from the radio beside her, static-laced but familiar. "Lydia, it's Ethan. I saw the upload. I'm coming for you." Her eyes widened. "Ethan? You're alive?" Another gunshot tore through the stairwell below. She grabbed the radio. "Hurry, Ethan. He's here." Dre's footsteps echoed closer, slow and deliberate. Lydia turned to face the door, the gun she'd taken from Fraser trembling in her grip. "Come any closer," she warned, "and I'll finish this story my way." He chuckled darkly. "You won't shoot. You're too much like him, too soft." The door burst open, and for a moment, they faced each other, two storms colliding in silence. Then lightning struck the tower, The power flickered, and the lantern exploded in sparks. Both dove for cover. Smoke filled the lantern room. The beam went dark. The mayor rose, gun in hand, eyes wild. And beneath the roaring storm, a small fishing boat was fighting toward shore, carrying the one man Lydia thought she'd lost forever. The storm's roar drowned out everything, the waves, the screams, even Lydia's own heartbeat. The lighthouse lantern was dead, its shattered glass glittering on the floor like fallen stars. Smoke curled through the broken chamber as Lydia crawled behind a beam, gun in hand, soaked and shaking. From below came the echo of footsteps and wind. Then, through the chaos, she heard the faint hum of an engine, a fishing boat struggling toward the pier.
Ethan.
He was alive. He was coming. But Dre was still here, and closer than ever. Dre's voice rose from the stairs, mocking, calm. "You're running out of miracles, Lydia." She pressed her back to the wall, teeth clenched. "You talk too much," she muttered under her breath. The heavy door creaked open. Dre stepped inside, his silhouette framed by fire and lightning. His gun gleamed in the flashes. "Richard wanted to expose me. I gave him a choice," Dre said coldly. "He jumped before I had to push." Lydia's fury boiled. "You murdered him." Dre shrugged. "Maybe. But tell me, what's one life compared to an empire?" Outside, the boat crashed against the rocks. Ethan leapt out, fighting the wind, dragging himself toward the lighthouse steps. His arm was bandaged, his face bloodied, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Hold on, Lydia," he shouted. The storm nearly swallowed his words. Back inside, Lydia fired. The bullet grazed Dre's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He cursed, ducking behind a support beam. She tried to move, but pain shot up her leg, shrapnel from the glass explosion earlier. She couldn't run. Not this time. Dre straightened, blood staining his sleeve. "You're not leaving this lighthouse alive." Lydia aimed again, breath steady. "Neither are you." Another lightning flash, another gunshot. This time, Dre stumbled back, but not before his bullet struck her shoulder. She fell hard, gasping. He stepped closer, towering over her. "You could have lived quietly, Lydia. No one would have cared what your husband did. But you had to be noble." She looked up at him through the pain.
No.
"I had to be honest." Suddenly crash. The side door burst open. Ethan charged in, soaked, shouting, "Drop it, Dre." The mayor spun, firing. The bullet missed by inches, ricocheting off the steel. Ethan tackled him, the two men crashing into a pile of old chains and tools. The struggle was brutal, fists, elbows, pure survival. Lydia tried to lift her gun, but her arm shook too much. Dre grabbed a wrench, swung. Ethan ducked, slamming him into the wall. "This is for Richard," he roared. Another flash of lightning. Another crash. Then silence. When the thunder eased, Dre lay still, unconscious or worse. Ethan staggered, chest heaving, blood running down his temple. He looked at Lydia and dropped to his knees beside her. "You're bleeding." She laughed weakly. "You noticed." He smiled through exhaustion. "You did it, Lydia. The world saw it all. The files hit every news channel." She blinked, dazed. "Then it's over." Ethan's eyes softened. Almost. He helped her stand, wrapping her arm around his shoulder. Together, they stepped outside onto the lighthouse balcony. The rain had softened, the clouds breaking into a bruised pink dawn. Lydia leaned against the railing, breathing shallowly. He said Richard jumped. Ethan looked at her quietly. "He didn't. I found his body. He fought Dre's men. He died trying to save the files." Tears welled in her eyes, blending with the rain. "So his death wasn't for nothing." "No," Ethan whispered. "It was for you, for this." As the first sunlight touched the sea, the sirens of approaching police boats echoed from the horizon. Dre's empire was crumbling, the truth unshakable. But Lydia, pale, bleeding, and finally at peace, whispered her last words. "Promise me, Ethan, you'll finish what he started." When the storm finally calmed, Ethan held Lydia in his arms beneath the fading light of dawn. Her pulse was weak, her breath shallow, but her eyes, they still glowed with peace. She whispered, "It's over, we did it." And for the first time, Ethan believed her. He pressed his forehead to hers, rain mixing with tears. "I'll finish it," he promised. "Everything you dreamed of, every truth Richard died for, I'll make sure the world never forgets." Then, as the sun broke through the last of the storm clouds, Lydia smiled one last time and slipped away. They buried her beside Richard, overlooking the ocean she loved. No grand ceremony, no cameras, just quiet waves and a single white rose. Ethan stood there, wind tugging at his coat, replaying her last words in his head. "Promise me." So he did. He took her story, their story, and turned it into a truth that no storm could bury again. Every document, every recording, every lie the mayor ever told, he gave it to the world. Within days, the headlines read, "Scotland's hidden corruption exposed." Mayor Dre was arrested, his empire shattered, his name forever stained. And Lydia McAllister? She became the name whispered in classrooms, the face on murals, the woman who proved that even silence can roar. Months later, Ethan returned to the lighthouse. The wind was gentler now, the sea calmer, as if the place itself had finally forgiven its ghosts. He set up his camera, the one Lydia had once teased him about. Through the lens, he focused on the sunrise and whispered, "Here's your light, Lydia. You finally got it back." He pressed record. The beam of dawn washed over the cliffs, and in that golden moment, it felt like she was there. They called him the stranger who kept her promise. But to him, she was never just a story. She was the reason he believed again, in truth, in love, and in how one broken woman could change an entire nation. And maybe, just maybe, if you're listening to this right now, you'll remember what Lydia taught us. That silence protects no one. That love is not weakness. And that truth, even when buried in storm, will always find its way back to the light. If Lydia's story touched you, don't just watch, act. Speak your truth. Comment where you are watching from in the comment section.